All right, so we are on chapter 5, the arrival of revival. Breakout of tongues. One evening at supper, Lee asked William to pray for him again. As William prayed, Lee started to speak in other tongues. Tongues means a heavenly language, a different language. That night in the prayer meeting, the service began as usual. People sang some songs to God and shared testimonies. Testimonies are when you share in your life what Jesus has done in your life. Okay, what he's doing. William opened his Bible at Acts 2:4 and preached from it again. When he finished speaking, Lee lifted his hands up to heaven and started to speak in the heavenly language of tongues. Jenny Moore was sitting nearby. As Lee spoke, she fell off her stool to the floor. When she opened her mouth to speak, she found herself speaking in tongues. That night, she spoke in 6 different languages as the Holy Spirit worked through her. After each language, it was translated into English. So the power of God fell so strong that she fell off her chair. Then Jenny got up and went over to the piano. Check this out. This is going to blow your mind. She had never played a piano in her life, but she played it beautifully and sang in the Spirit at the same time, meaning sang in a heavenly language. God had not only given her the gift of speaking in this special prayer language called tongues, he had also taught her to play the piano too. Did you catch that? Other people fell to the floor or found themselves speaking in tongues. Children who were there were baptized in the Holy Spirit. It was all very noisy as God touched different people. That's a fun noise. That's a God noise. Richard Ashbury's daughter came running in from the kitchen to find out what was happening, because this was at his home on Bonnie Brae Street in downtown LA. When she saw the crowd, she was amazed. People ran out of the house into the yard, still speaking in tongues and praising God. They wanted the whole world to know what was happening. God had found a group of people who were not trying to grow their own ministry, but who were simply seeking him. They weren't proud, and God had chosen to show himself to them. God shows himself to the humble. He shows himself to people who are seeking him. And so it was on April 9th, 1906, that Pentecost, God, the Holy Spirit, crashed in to Los Angeles. The rest of the week, the next day, people came to the house. They had heard what had happened the night before and wanted to be a part of it. Black people and white people came together to meet God. The crowds were so big that not everyone could get inside the house. A lot of those who did manage to get inside fell to the ground as God's power filled them. Can you imagine walking into somebody's house and you fall on the ground because the Holy Spirit's so thick? How cool would that be? That could be your house. That could be my house. A lot of those who did manage to get inside fell to the ground as God's power filled them. For the next 3 days, meetings took place in the house day and night. There were so many people there that the whole yard was full. Whole front yard full of people. The porch became the pulpit, and the street became the pews. So William stood out in the porch preaching, and people, this is downtown Los Angeles, came from everywhere. The more people came, the more God seemed to pour out his Spirit. Soon people were falling down to the ground, even when they got near the house. The power of God was so strong around that place. Imagine if that happened in your house, in your street. What do you think your neighbors would make of it? It would certainly get them talking about God, wouldn't it? And that's exactly what happened in Bonnie Brae Street. Over the next few days, hundreds of people were saved, and many people were healed. At times, the whole house seemed to shake. It was like in the days of the book of Acts. On the 3rd day, William stayed late praying with a friend. He was desperate to be baptized in the Holy Spirit and speak in tongues. Maybe it's not the right time for you, his friend said. Now, William is the one that God is using to fill everybody else with the Holy Spirit, but he's not filled yet. Does God have a will? Does God have a way? Is God's ways the best? But listen to William's face. But William refused to give up. He said, "The right time is now." Capital N, capital O, capital W. A short time later, he felt a mass of white-hot fire falling on him. He knew it was God, and he was unable to stand. They had prayed until 4 o'clock in the morning, and God had heard their prayer. When you are hungry for God, you just press in, and you just keep moving forward. Okay? There's no time limit with God. He talks to me in the middle of the night. Pretty consistently, middle night, when Miss Bradshaw's quiet and all her thoughts and feelings and her desires and her will is shut down, and he can talk. That's the only time he can get me quiet. And that's when he talks to me. Don't give up. Remember the women that came to God, kept going to the judge. Remember that story? Give me justice, give me justice, give me justice. She kept coming, she kept coming. Jesus tells us to keep knocking, to keep knocking, to keep knocking. And he did until he was able to have the baptism of the Holy Spirit and speak in tongues. It spreads. That's what the gospel does. His kingdom does not end. Jenny Moore had been the first woman to speak in tongues in Los Angeles. That experience changed her life. When she went to work on Friday, she spoke in tongues in front of her bosses. How fun is that? They were so shocked that they gave her a week off work so that she could rest and get back to normal. They thought she was sick. They thought something happened to her brain. They thought she was losing it. No, she had actually found it. Did you hear that? They thought she was losing it, but she had actually found it. Meanwhile, Sina Osterberg was praying for a lady with a broken leg to be healed. When one of the intercessors, an intercessor is somebody who prays for somebody else, from the Bonnie Brae meetings heard her praying, she went to join her in prayer. Afterwards, the lady invited Sina and her husband to come to the meeting. But Sina's husband wasn't interested in going. He had been working hard all day and was tired. Sina did not want to miss out on God's blessing, so Sina went by herself. Sina could feel God's presence there and could not wait to tell others about it. The next evening, she went to her church. Her son was a pastor, and with his permission, she shared what had happened. Sina's son and some of the men from his church decided to go and see what was happening. As they came near to the house, they heard the singing. There was a general sigh of relief. Quote, "These people are singing like we do. It can't be that weird," end quote. But as soon as they got into the building, they were in for a shock. Black people and white people were worshiping God together. What is this place? Sina's son wondered. What kind of mess are we walking into? Jesus is fun, isn't he? Holy Spirit is fun. It's messy fun. It's rolling in mud fun. It's having a water fight fun. But he did not have to wonder for long. As he heard people sharing their testimonies and singing in tongues, he knew it was a holy place. When people prayed, their faces looked like angels. Nobody was forcing them to pray. Nobody was laying their hands on them. Nobody was hyping them up to make them excited. These people were simply being so touched by God that they could not hold it in anymore. Sina's son had arrived thinking he was an expert leader in God's church. Before long, he realized that he needed more of God too. Afterwards, he told his mom, "I realized that I had to get humble, or else I wasn't going to get very far with God here, with God there. Should we move?" All across the city, people were hearing what God was doing at 214 Bonnie Brae Street. The meetings were loud, full, and often went on through the night. Some of the neighbors were starting to complain. They did not like the crowds who were passing by their houses and falling to the ground. Imagine you're, sitting in your living room and people are laying on your grass because they can't get up because the power of God's so thick. And they didn't know what was happening, so they were freaked out. Remember, a lot of times we fear. Jesus is walking on water. He said to his disciples, "Don't be afraid." Holy Spirit is scary cool because of the power. Okay? It's good scary. The late night meetings were fine for a couple of days, but the noise was too much for them to put up with forever. It was also clear that the large house in Bonnie Bray Street was not going to be big enough. So the search began for a new place. Nobody could have predicted that this was only the beginning of the most major move of God in that whole century, in 100 years here in LA. God was about to do something so extraordinary, something so supernatural, that it would change the church around the whole entire world, right here in downtown LA. So they're going to move to a place called Azusa Street. And this revival was called the Azusa Street Revival in the early 1900s. I was talking to Mrs. Dolio yesterday, and I asked her if that house on Bonnie Bray is still there, and this building in Azusa Street is still there. I asked her if I could take you so you could see it. We'd all go to downtown LA together, grab your parents, and just pray through our city streets again. How many of you would like to do that if we can make them see where this, because there's a well of revival, a well deep in that ground of revival that's still there. That's what we're praying for. LA needs it. California needs it. Our state is a mess. Okay? And there's a deep well that's still there. All right? So that was chapter 5. So I'm going to read Monday, even though there's no school, so that you can look at that. Okay? And I'm going to read every normal day. All right?